the motion be filed. Claire Carroll.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a functioning democracy requires functioning and well-resourced watchdogs. They're the organisations that provide the important checks and balances. They give the public confidence that government is being held to account, that there is transparency, and that the important values of independent scrutiny are being upheld. In New Zealand, Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, we have a shrinking media environment. We have under-resourced watchdogs, which is why we are standing here today having this discussion. Those watchdogs include the Office of the Ombudsman, the Office of the Auditor-General, the Commissioner for the Environment. They also include the Privacy Commissioner and the Human Rights Commission and many, many other important watchdogs. And there is and alongside that, Mr. Speaker, there is an unrelenting move away from the notion of a public media to a commercial media in the broadcasting environment that's eroded our ability and the public confidence to uphold those important principles and values in our country. So when we heard from the Office of the Ombudsman in a media release on September the 27th last year, which said that the office had ended that financial year with 10,636 complaints and other contacts received, which was up 22% on the previous year, where cases had grown from 800 live cases to more than 1,700 at one time. There were shockwaves that went through the community about how this could have happened and what the impact was. Crisis of democracy was what was being said at that time. And it's absolutely critical and important that we're here today discussing and agreeing on providing more resources to that particular office. But the other offices are also under pressure, and we must not take our eye off the impact that is happening as well. You had to ask yourself why there's been such an explosion, Mr. Speaker, and I know that other speakers have touched on this. The first explanation is that citizens are rightly becoming more demanding and more aware of the importance of transparency, and there's no doubt about that, and technology has encouraged and allowed that to happen. But the second thing, which is the most disturbing thing, is that this government is becoming more secret. So on the one hand, you've got the people wanting more transparency, and on the other hand, you've got a government that's becoming more secret and making it harder for people to actually access information. Our offices of Parliament are swamped, there's no doubt about that. That's why we're having this discussion. These offices provide a valuable and important service to Parliament and the New Zealand public, and it's absolutely vital that they're sufficiently funded to be able to carry out their full and proper investigations. I want to give you a couple of examples, Mr. Speaker, about just how difficult it is to actually for the office to carry out investigations, and what is leading to that explosion in complaints to the Office of the Ombudsman in particular. This motion only applies to the offices of Parliament. However, that under-resourcing, as I've said, and overburdening of those agencies is endemic under this government. Here's an example of one example of what has happened in recent times. We've all heard now of the issues around Solid Energy, around the collapse of a state-owned enterprise through mismanagement and ministerial neglect. Soon after the company's financial woes became public knowledge, they appeared before the Commerce Select Committee for a financial review. And while before the committee the acting CEO and chair were, as we should say, economical with the truth about the availability of the recently departed chief executive to appear before that committee, they also declined to answer many of the committee's questions as to why, as they weren't present when the actual decisions were made that led to the demise of that company. Financial reviews are an essential part of Parliament. They do ensure that taxpayers receive value by holding government departments and state-owned enterprises accountable. Government members of the committee have further blocked our ability to do this by objecting to a request for an inquiry. As a last-ditch attempt to gain insight into Solid Energy's circumstances, my colleague Clayton Cosgrove lodged an Official Information Act request of Solid Energy. They responded asking that the one-month deadline be extended by a further 6 weeks. Treasury also refused to provide a date for the release of relevant information on their website, declining an OIA request because the information would soon be publicly available. Even journalists attempting to access background information were stymied by the Minister's office, with his refusal to release, even in part, a scoping document which brought to light the overwhelming size of Solid Energy's debt. This was a complete disregard for public accountability and excessive use of secrecy by the government, which is leading to the unmanageable workload on our watchdog agencies. This is why these complaints are going to the Ombudsman, why they are being so swamped. And when the opposition has no mechanism by which to access information and hold public entities and their government masters to account, this undermines democracy. Another example, Mr Speaker, is as broadcasting spokesperson, my office frequently makes OIA requests of Television New Zealand or the Minister of Broadcasting with relation to TVNZ. Recently, I found it necessary to complain to the Ombudsman. Why? Because a request was made to the Minister's office, and this was in mid-February, seeking copies of the quarterly reports provided to the Minister from TVNZ. Not a difficult request, not a complicated request. In mid-March, the Minister wrote back to me seeking an extension of an additional 20 working days. 2 days later, he wrote again, advising me the request was now being transferred to TVNZ as it was more relevant to them. Finally, on the 30th of April, TVNZ declined the request in full. This was deemed necessary by them to protect their commercial interests. Ultimately, what should have been a straightforward request for advice provided to a minister by the state-owned broadcaster has taken over 2 months to be refused, and then for a reason which is now under investigation by the Ombudsman. And we hope that the Ombudsman will review this decision. But this is just 2 examples of the length of time that it takes to get requests answered by ministers, by ministries, and then the deferrals of those requests, and then the obfuscation of the responses. Mr Speaker, government is a significant influence in the day-to-day lives of many New Zealanders. People rightly expect that it should behave in a predictable, open and transparent way where it can. In a democracy, public confidence relies on citizens knowing what government is doing and why, and being able to take part in debates, knowing that government is listening and responding. Greater public confidence in government through more open government. That is one of the goals of the party on this side of the House. One of the things that would result in a lesser workload for the Office of the Ombudsman and provide confidence to public citizens that the principles of transparency are being upheld is the proactive release of information to establish, as is our policy, to establish as a default practice that ministers and government agencies release all cabinet papers and other relevant papers onto a dedicated website in line with the Official Information Act once a decision is announced by government. Exceptions would obviously apply, but the ultimate aim is to make information available, to be transparent, and if we did that, we would be killing 2 birds with 1 stone, Mr Speaker. We would be demonstrating transparency, and we would be reducing the workload on one of our most important watchdogs.
The question is the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The proposed address is available on the table of the House. The question is that the address be adopted. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. I call on Government Order of the Day number 2.
Education Amendment Bill, second reading.